This is the story of a man who played Britain's most hated television villain, who watched the nation despise him from behind a mask of complete professionalism, and who spent the years that followed quietly revealing exactly why Alan Bradley did what he did and why he should never have been killed off at all. Mark Eden stepped into that role at 57 years old, and the world he came from before Coronation Street found him is the part most people never think about. Theatre-trained, a character actor who'd worked alongside Judi Dench and Joan Plowright, appeared in Dr. Zhivago, played the title role in a Doctor Who serial so old the footage no longer exists, and turned down a permanent invitation from Peter Hall to join the Royal Shakespeare Company because the film money paid better. The kind of lad who earned respect without ever quite becoming famous. And then Alan Bradley happened. For a while after that, walking through Manchester without someone coming at him with an umbrella became genuinely difficult. What unfolded between that first appearance in January of '86 and the tram tracks of Blackpool in December of '89 stands as one of the most carefully constructed character arcs British soap opera has ever produced. But the story does not end with the tram. What Mark Eden said in the years that followed about what he understood about Alan, what he regretted, and what he believed should have been different, changes the way you look at the whole thing. To understand why any of it matters, you have to go back to where Alan Bradley started, because the character did not start as a villain. And January of '86 brought him to the street as a father, an absent one at that. He'd walked out on his daughter Jenny and her mother back in '78 and gone unseen for 8 years. Jenny had been taken in by Rita Fairclough, who ran the cabin newsagent and gave the girl a home and a stability her own father had never bothered to offer. When Alan turned up from Leeds wanting to reclaim his daughter, he arrived as a complication rather than a threat, which is an important distinction. Selfish, certainly. Irresponsible, without question, but not dangerous. The lad sold himself well, and that charm was the whole point. He could be pleasant. When it suited him, he landed a job fitting air conditioning, and later burglar alarms. He began seeing Rita, and he moved into her house on the street. For a time, the character ticked along without distinction. Present and mildly watchable, but not exactly setting the screen on fire. By the midpoint of the run, people inside Granada were privately saying Alan Bradley was going nowhere, and they were right. Not comic enough to be loved, not dramatic enough to be gripping, he drifted into what David Liddermont later described as the dangerous middle ground of Coronation Street, the place where characters end up when the writers stop being inspired by them. If the writers aren't inspired, that character is a dead duck. That changed when a writer called Peter Wally brought an idea to the table. Rita's house still held deeds in the name of her late husband Len Fairclough, who died back in '83, and nobody had ever updated them. Alan, who handled the household paperwork, notices. He walks into a bank where nobody knows Len is dead, poses as him, and remortgages Rita's house to fund his business. When Liddermont heard it, he called it a very clever idea and then added something worth remembering. The decision was never to turn Alan Bradley into an evil person. The fraud wasn't the destination, it was the starting point for watching one emerge. Eden had spent most of his career playing composed upper-class men, and casting him as Alan gave the character something that made him genuinely unsettling, a surface respectability that kept slipping without ever quite collapsing. Alan did not look like trouble. He looked like someone's dad, someone's bloke, presentable and capable of decent manners when he chose to use them. That surface made what sat underneath so much harder to read. The kind of man who could be in the room, and you'd feel nothing wrong until something very wrong had already happened. The most frightening version of Alan Bradley, as Eden understood it, was not the one who raged, but the one who managed to seem reasonable while doing unreasonable things. During rehearsals for the attack on his receptionist Dawn Prescott, Eden held his performance back deliberately so that when the cameras rolled, his co-star would not be prepared for what came. He wanted her reaction to be unguarded, and the scene landed exactly as intended. And here's something Eden spoke about openly in later years. Alan Bradley had a record before the street ever laid eyes on him. A 2-year suspended sentence for assault, sitting quietly in his past, I barely noticed by the audience at the time. Not a man who'd snapped under pressure. A man who had always been capable of this, and Weatherfield simply hadn't found out yet. By 88, the pieces were arranged. Alan had been carrying on with a woman called Gloria Todd while seeing Rita, sorted that when Gloria ended it herself, gone to Dubai on a work placement, returned, proposed to Rita, and been turned down at the registry office steps. She'd only discovered it was her own wedding when she arrived, which tells you everything about how Alan approached the question of what other people get to decide. Rita, still committed to the relationship, lent him £6,000 to help him get started. What nobody knew was that in November of 88, he'd already done something far worse. The deeds to Rita's house, through the redirect of bank correspondence to his shop on Curzon Street, the bank where Leonard Fairclough was presumed alive, all of it fell into place, and on the 16th of January 89, Alan walked out of that bank carrying £15,000. Rita's house, in a dead man's name, put up as collateral for a loan she'd never agreed to. What followed was months of sustained deception, and that's the detail that matters most about his character. Morning after morning, Alan went to work, knowing exactly what he'd done, and managing it carefully, keeping the two worlds separate, redirecting post, fielding calls. None of this was impulsive. That kind of sustained daily deception requires a particular type of person, one who has decided that his own version of events is the one that counts. His receptionist brought it down. Dawn Prescott had noticed correspondence addressed to Leonard Fairclough, a name that made no sense in a business Alan owned. Something happened between her and Alan that gave her every reason to go to Rita, and she did. Rita listened, searched Alan's office on the 8th of March, found what she needed, and went to the building society to confirm that Len Fairclough had been dead for years. 5 days after that came Jenny's 18th birthday. Alan arrived at number, and 7 that evening expecting a party, and found instead a woman who had spent 5 days sitting with the knowledge that the man she lived with had stolen her home. This was the confrontation the whole arc had been building toward, and what made it genuinely worth watching was how Alan responded. He did not deny the fraud. He admitted it, and then, with what sounded like complete sincerity, he argued that his actions had made the business successful, that she should look at what he'd built, that the result justified the doing of it. He framed the fraud not as a crime against Rita, but as an investment made on her behalf without consulting her, which gave the audience the clearest picture they'd ever got of how his mind worked. Not a confession, a rationalization. And the rationalization was worse, in its way, because it showed a man who genuinely believed it. When Rita told him it was finished, the composure went. He attacked her, and the residents arriving from Jenny's party pulled him away. He ran. 25 million combined viewers watched that episode, and 6 weeks of consequences followed. Police found his car abandoned in open shore. A phone call to Jenny asked her to bring his passport and money to Gatley Station. Officers followed her there and made the arrest. Charged with deception and actual bodily harm, Alan spent 6 months on remand and celebrated his 50th birthday in prison. October of '89 brought his trial, and at the last moment he changed his plea to guilty. 2 years was the sentence, but the time on remand counted, and he walked straight back out. And this is where the production made a decision worth noticing. His release was timed to coincide with Coronation Street's expansion to 3 episodes a week. Not a wedding, not a birth, a man walking free after terrorizing a woman, with the audience's fury doing all the work. He moved into a bedsit at 31 Redford Street, took a job on a building site directly opposite Rita's house, and ran a campaign of sustained intimidation that included manipulating Jenny into believing Rita's fears were hysteria. Rita suffered a complete breakdown and disappeared without a word to anyone. Police dug up the building site looking for her. The community had turned on Alan entirely, and nothing was found. Rita was alive, but nobody in Weatherfield knew where. Alec Gilroy found her in Blackpool, singing at the Strand Hotel under her old stage name, Rita Littlewood. Her mind had retreated to lens time, safe inside a version of her own past where none of what had been done to her had occurred. Alec returned to Weatherfield, told Alan where Rita was, and handed over the hotel address. Alan drove to Blackpool, and what followed on the 8th of December '89 became one of the most watched television moments Britain had seen. Tram number 710, a double-decker balloon car built by the English Electric Company back in '34, had been running regular Blackpool service right up to that point. The production team secured special permissions from Blackpool Transport to film on the promenade tracks, and hundreds of people gathered to watch once filming began. Eden described it later as terribly difficult under those conditions. The tram company had worried about associating their unblemished safety record with a death, even a fictional one, but decided the publicity would outweigh the hesitation. Alan forced his way into the Strand, found Bet Gilroy waiting rather than Rita, and got nothing from her. He waited in his car. When Rita came walking back along the promenade, he forced her into the car. She got out and ran for the tram tracks, and she crossed them, with the tram passing close enough to shake her. Alan ran after her. The tram did not pass him the same way. Bet rushed out and found Rita on her knees sobbing, and in that moment, at the sight of Alan's body, at the sound of Bet's voice, Rita's memory came back. All 15 years of it returned at once. All the viewing figures for that period are still argued about, but what the records confirm is that 26.93 million combined viewers tuned in for the episode from the 15th of March, the one where Alan was being hunted after the attack on Rita. And that stands as the highest combined Barb rating in the show's entire history. Eden himself, speaking in 2004, put the figure on the night he died at around 26.5 million. Either way, '89 ended with the show averaging 15.5 million per broadcast, the highest since '85, with 45 episodes reaching number 1 in the weekly charts. After the tram, Alan Bradley stopped being a character and became something closer to a cultural landmark. The Sun branded him Britain's biggest rat, voted on by readers, beating J.R. Ewing from Dallas and Dirty Den from EastEnders. Eden received sackloads of hate mail, and after a woman set about him in the street with an umbrella, he concluded it was prudent to stop his regular strolls around Manchester. Every offer that came in after '89 was for psycho roles, a complete reversal of the composed upper-class gentleman he'd spent years playing. ITV placed the storyline 8th in their 50 Years 50 Moments countdown. Sky One put the tram death at number 30 on their list of the greatest television endings ever made. On the 20th anniversary, Eden himself went back to Blackpool and unveiled a blue plaque at the Strand Hotel. And then there is the tram. Number 710 stayed in regular service for years after '89, and when it eventually went up for sale, Blackpool Tramtown Museum mounted a public campaign to save it, because the most popular question their visitors ask, as the museum confirmed, is, where is the tram that killed Alan Bradley? When Jenny returned to the street in 2015, Norris Cole asked if she'd be traveling to the shops by tram. During the 50th anniversary tram crash in 2010, Rita, trapped inside the cabin rubble, looked up and said, "What is it with me and trams?" Peter Kay paid tribute in Phoenix Nights, so flowers tied to a lamppost, in memory of Alan, 8th December, '89, R.I.P. What Mark Eden said in the years before his death is the part of the story that deserves more attention than it usually gets. He regretted the death, not bitterly, with no grievance against the production. He understood the logic of it. Monsters always get killed, they don't keep them on. But his words carried something underneath the acceptance. If they had left it open, it is just possible that he could have survived, and they could have brought me back. Alan Bradley dying the way he died was dramatically satisfying, and Eden knew that, but the character still had something in him, and a death that specific leaves no room for the future. In a 2004 interview, Eden talked about coming out with a big bang of around 26.5 million viewers on the night he died, and he was smiling when he said it. Proud of the numbers, proud of what the role had been, and quietly honest about what came after, because every offer Eden received for a decade came filtered through Alan Bradley. The theatre work, the career he'd been building before Granada found him, all of it ran through a single Corey villain. What gets overlooked when people only think about the character is the life that produced the actor who played him. Eden left school at 14. Tuberculosis found him as a young man and put him in a sanatorium for nearly 2 years. And while he was there, a teacher pointed him toward the library. He catalogued every book in the place, worked his way through Shakespeare, and discovered a world he said he hadn't known existed. Coming out of that sanatorium, reading like a scholar and holding no qualifications whatsoever. Before a stage ever found him, he worked as a tailor's presser, a fairground barker, a seaside photographer, and a vocalist with bands along the coast, nearly 30 before he joined his first theatre company. Arnold Wesker's theatre trilogy at the Royal Court brought him alongside Joan Plowright and Frank Finlay, and the RSC brought him opposite Judi Dench. Peter Hall wanted him as a permanent member of the company, and Eden turned the offer down because the film money paid better. Back in '64, he played Marco Polo in Doctor Who opposite William Hartnell across 7 episodes, and every frame of that serial is now gone. When Mark Gatiss cast Eden in An Adventure in Space and Time in 2013, his last screen credit, filmed at 85, he spoke about Marco Polo and about Hartnell with the warmth of someone who'd never stopped thinking well of that chapter. His autobiography came out in 2010 under the title Who's Going to Look at You?, taken from what his mother said when he told her he wanted to act. In a 2004 interview, Eden described himself as a very fortunate man. At the age of 56, with 2 failed marriages behind me, I meet the love of my life. How lucky is that? He was talking about Sue Nichols, Audrey Roberts on the street, who stayed at his side through everything that followed, including the Alzheimer's that found him in his final years and the hospitalization in November of 2020. New Year's Day, 2021. Mark Eden died peacefully at 92, and the tributes reflected what the industry actually thought of him. John Whiston, ITV's managing director of continuing drama, said Eden had set the template for every Corrie villain that came after, Hillman, Phelan, Jeff Metcalf, and called it a fantastic dramatic legacy. Sally Ann Matthews, who'd played Jenny, said she loved him and called him the most wonderful TV dad, teacher, and friend. Mark Gatiss described him as a gentleman and a fine actor who spoke fondly of Marco Polo right to the end. Lee Boardman kept it simple. By a mile, the best Coronation Street baddie of all time. Not one of those people led with the tram. They led with the man. The truth that Alan Bradley finally revealed did not come on a beach in Blackpool, and it did not come in any farewell scene. It came months earlier, in the front room at number 7, when Rita asked him how he could have done it, and Alan Bradley, calmly, with complete conviction, explained that he'd done what was necessary and that she should be grateful for the results. Not the confession of a man who knew he'd done wrong. The genuine belief of a man who could not see that he had. He looked at a woman he'd defrauded, attacked, and driven to breakdown, and saw someone being unreasonable about a situation that had, from his point of view, worked out rather well. That's what separated him from every soap villain before him. Not the violence, plenty of them had that, but the explanation. He explained himself, and the explanation carried its own horrible logic from where he was standing. You could follow his thinking, even as everything in you resisted it. And in that combination is almost impossible to write well and very hard to perform without tipping into caricature. Eden never tipped, not once, across 221 episodes. Mark Eden understood Alan Bradley completely, played him with complete intelligence, and then spent the rest of his long life being honest about what the role had given him and what it had cost. He did not regret Alan Bradley. He just thought a tram was a rather final way to end a perfectly good character.